have to make a decision between putting food on the table and paying rent. Even with the recent rent increases, repairs are still not getting done in apartments. And now we're facing a situation where there's an unreasonable burden for tenants. It's been an unreasonable burden for a long time, but now it's just getting ridiculous. So if you live in a rent stabilized apartment, this applies to you. So what are rent stabilized apartments? So rent stabilized apartments are apartments that come with additional benefits and protections for tenants. So your rent increases are regulated by something called the Rent Guidelines Board, which we're going to talk about. But if you live in a rent stabilized apartment, one of the protections that you have is that you cannot be evicted for not having your lease renewed and for not having a lease. And most of the time that is because of the owner. So there are about 1 million rent stabilized apartments in New York City, right? About half of the apartments in New York City are rent stabilized. So most of the rent stabilized apartment buildings have units of 6 or more. And these are pretty old buildings that were built before 1970s. Yes, a lot of buildings in New York City are old. So what is the Rent Guidelines Board? So the Rent Guidelines Board regulates rent increases for rent stabilized apartments. They have 9 members that are appointed by the New York City mayor. 2 of the members represent tenants. The other 2 represent owners, and the other 5 are public members. So this Rent Guidelines Board directly impacts the everyday life of tenants that live in rent stabilized apartments. So this does not apply to folks who do not live in rent stabilized apartments. Your situation is different. You pay market rate and the rent is determined by the owner, and there's usually a negotiation between the owner and the tenant. But back to rent stabilized apartments. So on Wednesday, April 30th, the Rent Guidelines Board took a preliminary vote concerning rent increases. So tenant advocates wanted a freeze on rent increases. What they got instead was a 5-4 vote by the 9-member board approving rent increases. So what they are proposing are rent increases between